Good afternoon, and welcome to the Financing Strategies for Startups webinar. I'm Molly Zimmerman, the Associate Director of the New York State Science and Technology Law Center. The center is funded by New York State Empire State Development and NYS and is the sponsor of the series. The speakers today are Marcene Sonneborn. She is a professor of practice at the iSchool at Syracuse University, as well as an SBIR and innovation specialist at the Technology Development Organization for Central New York. We also have Dr. Glenn Vonk, the Director of Business Development and Alliances at the National Council of Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer. The organization aims to advance university startup efforts by providing networking, policy advocacy, and education opportunities. The webcast is moderated by Shubha Ghosh, the Crandall Melvin Professor of Law and Director of the Technology Commercialization Law Program here at the Syracuse University College of Law. The format is a panel discussion, and your questions are welcome. Please type them in the chat box where they can be accessed by the panel. The presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the center website in approximately 2 weeks. Shubha, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Molly. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And I welcome everybody in our audience to the May webinar. And I want to welcome and thank our guests, Professor Marcene Sonneborn and Dr. Glenn Vonk, where we're going to have hopefully a very lively and instructive discussion regarding financing for tech startups and even for mid-level or mature companies. And just to give you some sense of the framing for the discussion, as Molly mentioned, I'd like this to be a free open discussion, and we'll see where the discussion leads us. I've had some seed questions for our two panelists that I shared with them earlier, but I really welcome questions from the audience. As Molly mentioned, please type in the questions, and as I see them, I will try to integrate them into our discussion. And so the basic structure is kind of simply, Marcene represents the university side of our discussion about financing, and Glenn represents the corporate side. And of course, those sides can blur and intermingle. Excuse me, and we'd like to discuss that as well. But I thought I would open our discussion by turning to Marcene and then to Glenn with the question about really a description about what SBIR financing is and how it fits into the broader picture for financing business ventures. So Marcene, would you like to get us started?
Sure, thank you. So the Small Business Innovation Research Program has been around since 1982, and it is a program that is a federal government program that is reallocated by Congress about every 4 to 6 years. It has just recently been reauthorized in December until 2022. This is a program that provides, over the course of each year, approximately $2 billion to small businesses, fewer than 500 employees. There are 11 federal agencies that participate as a requirement of the amount of government contracting funds that they award to small businesses and externally. And the SBIR program, all agencies that have more than $100 million in external R&D contracts are required to participate in the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And all agencies that have more than $1 billion in external R&D contracts are required to participate in STTR, or Small Business Technology Transfer Research. Each of these 11 federal agencies runs its own program, and so therefore each program is different and has its own rules and requirements. And so it's important that that if you are interested in one or more agencies, that you focus on the agencies and treat them as a customer. Because in fact, if it is there are both grant and contract agencies. Grant agencies are agencies such as the National Institutes of Health, and Congress has said there are certain topics that are important for the future of the health in the United States. And so therefore the NIH puts those topics into its SBIR program. However, there are also contract agencies, and Department of Defense is the largest contract agency. And when you enter the SBIR program through a contract agency, the expectation is for that agency that you will become a federal contractor, and the technology that you are developing through the SBIR program will be something that they will purchase from you. And as a matter of fact, one of the benefits of the SBIR program is that if an SBIR was the start of the development of this technology, after you go through phase 1, which is pre-feasibility, you're testing the technology primarily. Going into phase 2, you now know that the technology is feasible. The phase 1 is for SBIR is 6 months, and for STTR is 12 months. And I'll explain those two programs. And phase 2 is up to 2 years. And then there is a phase 3. Now, phase 1 and phase 2 are funded under the legislation for SBIR. Phase 3 is referred to as the commercialization phase. And phase 3 for a contract agency, those funds come from the contract agency, so through your contract with that agency. For a phase 3 in the grant agencies, basically that means that you are moving your technology into the commercial market, and you will have commercial market customers and businesses that are going to be partnering with you, but will also be purchasing the technology that you have developed.
Thank you, Marcy. And so we'll turn it over to Glenn in a minute, but Marcy, one question about this. Can you give us a sense from the university side briefly, the benefits of SBIR and the availability of SBIR? Is it tied to any other type of funding? For example, do you have to have a grant from the NSF or from the NIH in order to avail yourself of the SBIR if you are a university startup?
A university startup, you don't have to have any grant whatsoever in order to start. As a matter of fact, the average company that wins an award for SBIR has 9 employees. And so, however, from a university perspective, typically that would be based on university technology that would be either licensed to someone outside the university, such as an organization which has fewer than 500 employees, or it would be sort of moved into the commercial market by individuals who were from the university who decided they wanted to get into the commercial market. And so, therefore, that's one of the difficulties with universities is if you are a principal investigator for one of the federal agencies or for one of the awards from the federal agencies, you have to be at least 51% employed by the company during the term of the federal grant. And so therefore, it needs to be individuals who are interested in stepping out into the commercial market. Now, one of the issues that is, how do you work? You will not get your benefits from the university if you work less than 50% time. However, playing with that, the schedule and summers and other time off has enabled some of my previous clients to be able to be the principal investigator for some of the programs. But it's something that typically it's helpful if that individual who is going to be the principal investigator, that individual is committed to starting up the company and commercialization.
Thank you, Marcy. Can you give us a sense, just very briefly, about how many universities and what percent of SBIR funding, however you want to do the statistics or however they're calculated, is available or given to university startups?
So that's a question that I don't know specifically, but I talked about the 2 different programs. And typically, the technology that we are talking about is the type of technology that is developed at universities, or the research and development is started at universities. And then when someone determines that it's beneficial to take this into the commercial market, that's when the application goes in for the either SBIR or STTR. Now, if it is SBIR, typically that would be a person who is employed by the company at least 51%. Now, there is also the STTR program, Small Business Technology Transfer Research, was created by Congress because they identified that much of this technology required university level research and development to be done. And so therefore, in some of the SBIR, the 5 federal agencies, the 5 largest federal agencies that provide STTR, in these agencies, the principal investigator, depending on the agency, can come from either the university or from the company. And so the STTR program was intended to help the STTR program pull the technology out of the university. Does that?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Marcy. Yeah. So let's turn to Glenn to get a perspective from the corporate or the for-profit side. Glenn, can you give us a sense of the picture of SBIR and or STTR funding from the corporate side?
Happy to do that, Shubha. So a large corporation cannot directly apply for an SBIR grant. However, the SBIR program is really of critical importance to large corporates. The reason for that is that university research, while it's really excellent and it generates a body of knowledge that's very important to our country, it's really typically not at a stage where a corporate is ready to invest in developing that technology. Now, sometimes a corporate will license the technology, or it will do a research collaborative agreement with the university to work on that technology with a specific researcher, or it will work on that within its own research organization. However, all those modes of operation tend to commit more of an expensive infrastructure within the corporate to developing that technology. So there's a trend in corporates to work more and more with startups. Startups have a lower cost structure, they can move more quickly, and they also have access to this SBIR funding that helps them develop that technology, and that provides an additional competitive advantage for large corporates that work with startups who are accessing SBIR and STTR funding. So there are a lot of reasons for corporates to work with them. It turns out, interestingly, that one of the success factors for receiving an SBIR grant is the letter of support from a corporate that indicates that that particular research or that particular body of knowledge that is going into that startup is something that in fact can be commercialized. So the granting agencies often look for that opinion from corporates, and to be successful in obtaining an SBIR grant, you really want to obtain several letters of support if you can, more than one, from significant corporate partners validating that this technology is something of interest and that government should invest in as a commercialization venue. So if you think about it another way, you can think about pulling research out of your laboratory and thinking about, well, what are all the things that need to happen to commercialize that research? Well, you have to do it a bunch of times. You have to make sure that you can do it every time, and then it has to be manufacturable. It has to be done at a cost that's attractive. You have to have a sense of what the market's going to be and what this product or service is going to be and who's going to buy it, what they're going to pay for it. So these are all things that can be developed into partnership with a corporation. And for a corporate that sees an alignment with the specific body of knowledge that you have in your research group and sees an opportunity, they often will enter into a discussion with you to develop that concept at an early stage, not necessarily being financially involved with you or supporting that work, but offering guidance with the idea that if you take it to a more mature step, that they're going to want to engage with you to do further development and eventually hope to end up in something that's commercializable that they're either going to buy from the startup or acquire that startup. So just to recap a little bit, corporates are very interested in what's happening with startups. They're very interested in helping startups achieve SBIR funding for things that are well aligned with their business and technology development strategies. and they're becoming more and more engaged as time goes on.
Thank you, Glenn. So it sounds like a company has to do a fair amount of work even before applying for an SBIR. Is that correct? I mean, how much test marketing or commercialization do they have to, or preliminary commercialization do they have to do? Or can they rely upon forecasts or business plans or their kind of market landscape that they may have created?
So it depends a little bit on the phase with the SBIR program. So an early phase one program, such as Marcy was describing, is something where you're really just trying to vet a technology that looks interesting, and you see an opportunity. So a robust opportunity analysis is what it looks like there. And by opportunity, I mean what's the potential of this technology to transform, or meet an unmet need out in the marketplace, and how much revenue basically is going to come in from that, how much societal change is that technology going to bring, what are the benefits around that. So that's more at the early stage in the phase ones. Now, having said that, one of the things that's a challenge in the phase ones is you really do want to link through as well as you can through the phase two and tell people what you think the development path is going to be, so that you have basically a whole picture of development through the commercialization project is conceptualized in the phase one, so that you can say, even when you're applying for the phase one, if I succeed with this, here's my phase two, and here's what it looks like, and here's where we're going to get to. And that kind of thinking, that more sort of big picture thinking, is something that will help that proposal succeed. Marcy, I'll let you comment a little bit too.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Marcy. I'd like to hear from you about that. So.
When we're looking at a phase one and a company going into phase one, we're talking about pre-feasibility. We don't know if the technology will work. And so therefore, if you're looking at, for example, Department of Defense, they work with technology readiness levels, or TRLs levels. And so therefore, if you look at the Department of Defense phase one, that takes the company from TRL1 to about TRL3. Phase two goes from approximately TRL4 to TRL6, and then commercialization takes it all the way up to TRL9. So it takes approximately 7 to 9 years in order for that part, or that component that is the base for the SBIR funding, is going to be ready to get onto the Navy ship or onto some of the systems within the federal agency. And so when we are starting to think about our phase one, if you think about, you have to go from TRL1 all the way up to TRL9 when it's going to be ready for the actual commercialization. That could be 7, 8, 9 years. And so that's a long distance from commercialization when that company is first starting. And phase one, the primary focus is, what is the feasibility that you are testing in your phase one? What are the technical components or capabilities that you don't yet have and that no one else in the country has in order to do what you are trying to accomplish? There was one other thing. The whole issue about, first of all, technology should be licensed from the university. For phase one SBIR, there's not a requirement for that, but for STTR, when the partnership is with the university, it is before the phase one, and phase one for STTR is a 1-year program. And before that phase one can go in, the company has to state that it has licensed the technology from the university, so that they don't start down the path of commercializing the technology, get it to a point where it looks like it's going to be successful, and then have to negotiate the license. So it's important right up front to go to the licensing office and talk to them about the terms, the conditions, and what you are trying to do as the SBIR applicant company. The other thing is, Glenn mentioned something about partnering with corporations, and an SBIR company can, or STTR company can partner with another small organization that is an SBIR organization or not, or can partner with for the 1/3 of its funding, can go to a university, can go to an outside partner, and for a large corporation can also be your partner. So for example, Lockheed Martin in Syracuse has an SBIR office. And I have spoken with the individual who is at Lockheed Martin, and that is an office that is prepared to start to have conversations with companies that have technology that would be appropriate for Lockheed Martin to commercialize in the future. And by bringing them into your phase 1, you have an early stage partner where they are already participating in the development of the technology. And chances are they are going to be your entree to get that technology into the Department of Defense applications.
Okay, thank you, Marcene. That also gets us into kind of, I think, the next set of questions, and that is, if you're looking, Marcene, from a university perspective, if you are a research professor or an entrepreneur within a university, what types of advice would you give in terms of long-term planning for this type of financing, either SBIR or STTR? And looking at that same question from the university perspective, what is it that a university could do to facilitate this, or are there things within a university that would need to be changed in order to make this process move more smoothly? And then, Glenn, turning to you after Marcy has set that up, if you are within a corporate entity and you're looking to partner with with somebody within a university, at what stage would you start getting involved, and what types of planning would you do? So, Marcy, would you want to set us up for that?
Sure. One of the first things that if it's got to be the company that applies. So if there is a professor at a university who has decided that he or she is going to move into a less than 50%, or basically less than 50% role with the university, and is going to be developing the technology within a facility, there has to be a facility, and many universities will make it easy for SBIR companies to take up to move their company or start their company within a university facility. And so, but that requires a very close relationship with the licensing department and a discussion with the university about what are the financial terms that the university is willing to set up with the entrepreneur who is going to be establishing the company there. There are also issues having to do with intellectual property, who owns the intellectual property, and I mentioned before that that's very important to get that identified up front. But it also requires working with the facility to determine what are the things that are going to be used within the facility. So if there is, a very scientific high-level R&D type of piece of equipment that's needed by the company, that all has to go into the SBIR budget and has to be negotiated. And then who is able to work with that company? And there may be intellectual property issues having to do with if a university professor is working on some of the research and development. And so all of that has to be built in upfront and has to have upfront agreements in order to move that forward so that you don't have problems at the other end after you've already started to develop the company and the relationship.
Thank you, Marcia. Before we turn it over to Glenn, there was one question from the audience, and so I think you answered this in part, but I'll read the entire question. Is it better/cheaper to license tech from university before testing feasibility? And then the second part is, what % of the SBIR STTR grant does a university typically take? E.g., more like 55 to 65% for overhead, or more like 10% for a gift? And I can reread part.
All right, so that depends on the university, that depends on the technology, that depends on the company. Now, is it cheaper to license from the university up front, you said, before there is any true value? And so you have to license up front. Otherwise, you may be starting down the path of commercializing this technology. And let's say the technology has a better deal from IBM or from a major corporation. And so maybe you get into the SBIR program about maybe 3 months, maybe even 6 months. And the university says, well, IBM came in and, we don't want to license you. So you need to get that license right up front before you start your SBIR application. So that's an important factor that you have. Is it cheaper? It depends on how much value is in the technology. And so a lot of that has to do with what kind of technology are we talking about? What are the other applications, the competing applications for this? Are there things that the SBIR company can do that will pull off a field of use so that the entire license for that technology does not have to go to the small business? The SBIR company can just take off a field of use. Let's say it's agriculture or it's health or it's defense. Depending on that, I'm assuming that the university will look at what is the potential commercialization, how much is that worth, what are the other fields of use that might be offered to others who could license that same technology? Is there competition? So you have to design or develop the licenses so that you don't have a situation where there's, conflicts of interest in this situation. All of that has to happen right up front. I think that what percent does it take? That's really between the entrepreneur, the owner of the company, and the 51% owner and the university. And it's a negotiation just like any other licensing agreement might be or would be.
Would typically that percentage be set forth in university policy, or is it really a kind of open-ended negotiation between the entrepreneur, the founder, and the university?
I think, again, it depends on the technology. It depends on the relationship of the individual with the university, and what is the value of the technology that is totally uncommercialized? It has just come off of maybe a couple of R&D grants to the university. What is the value? And so there's going to be an evaluation placed on that by the university. And through the licensing office and through the attorneys and others who may have advice or information about what might that technology be valued at once it got commercialized.
Thank you, Marcy. So now turning to you, Glenn, what would an investor on the corporate side or an entrepreneur on the corporate side look for from the university or from the researcher within a university in the context of SBIR, STTR? Is there are there in thinking about that question, are there how do I put this, places where the two can meet? Is this done by word of mouth? How do those connections occur?
Yeah, let me paint a couple of pictures, because corporations are not monoliths. They don't have a single approach to sourcing external technology and startups. So I'll paint two pictures for you. One is an R&D group. An R&D group is going throughout the world looking at startups that have platform technologies that can transform their business or satisfy a technology strategy. And when they find something like that they feel is very transformative, then often they will acquire that startup and they will bring it in at a fairly early stage with the idea that they're going to build a platform, maybe even for several business units around that particular technology. And I have seen that in my own career. On the other end of the continuum, you have business units. And so put it to you this way. Let's say you're the leader of a $500 million business unit in a large corporation. You're going to be required by your shareholders to show approximately, say, a 7% increase in your revenue line, okay, every year, which is going to amount in a $500 million business to around $35–40 million in new revenue. So if you don't, as a leader, meet that goal, then you're not going to keep your job, number one. Number two, you're not going to get the compensation that you're expecting. So these guys are looking for about $50 million in revenue, and this is a fairly moderate-sized business in a large corporation. So they're very focused on things that have revenue, that are existing products that are doing well, that they can put into their channel and scale out globally. So those are kind of the two ends of the continuum in the corporates and what corporates are looking for. So part of the question is, well, you know, how do I develop a relationship with a corporate? One of the things is know who you're talking to, know where they're coming from. If they're in R&D, they're going to be a little more interested in having those early conversations and working with you. If they're in a business unit, they may still work with you, but they're going to be looking for defined milestones and progress towards that revenue event that's going to allow them to really engage with the thing that matters to them, and that's in doing the financial, meeting their financial goals. They can help do that in the sense that a startup oftentimes may not quite be ready for that level of revenue, and SBIR probably is not going to take you to that stage where you're going to be in the position to generate $10 or $20 million of revenue. But what SBIR can do for a startup with careful planning, and I think it starts even at the phase one myself, to start thinking about a very coherent plan to get to a point after a phase two where you have a proof of concept that's going to convince an angel investor to put some additional money into your company and help you bridge into that commercialization activity. Angels will put in more money to get you to that first product, to get you to that point where a corporate can acquire you, or you can stand up your business as an IPO or a stand-up company. So that's kind of the dimensions of how corporate would look.
Okay, just to mention something about what Glenn just said. He said when you get to the end of your phase two, actually, as soon as you get your phase two, I recommend that my clients start to have some of those conversations, because if you wait until the end of phase two, you're going to be losing time between end of phase two and now. Between the phase two and phase three, there's a time period. And if you're not generating revenue, or you don't have an agreement in place, or you're starting to work on that relationship, then you're going to have too much time. And it may be that someone else could surpass you with the technology. And so you have to be pretty careful about that. The other thing is, it may be determined that the technology is not feasible in the first phase one. And so occasionally these are very risky. It's high risk research and development, which is why the government is putting in this amount of money. The government is not taking, and they don't have a percentage of this. And as a matter of fact, if it's in a company that is taking this into the commercial market through the SBIR program, then that company does not have to give up equity unless they start to take on venture capitalists or other partnerships. And so you have to look at all of your different opportunities and where is the best opportunity to first be successful with your SBIR phase one, phase two, and then moving into phase three. Because you need to think about, is that best partner a major corporation that is already in the market? Or is it another small company that has a partner with a major corporation? Or is it with someone else, another company that is out there? So how is it going to get to market fastest? And all of the federal reviewers who are looking at this, they are going to evaluate the commercialization plan. In phase one, you have to have just generally, this is how we're thinking about commercializing. In phase two, all of the agencies require that there be a commercialization plan. What's in the commercialization plan is different from one agency to another. However, it's very important to have that commercialization plan. And the closer the company is to having a relationship, or the closer the small business is to having a relationship with a major player in the industry, one of the major corporations, or closer the company is to having a relationship with Department of Defense or one of the other federal agencies who is going to be adopting the technology, the more appealing the phase 2 is going to be to those reviewers. Now, also, the review process is very different depending on whether it is a grant or contract agency. If it is a grant contract like the National Institutes of Health, then you are going to have peer review, and there's a panel of approximately 25 people who are put together by the National Institutes of Health, who are the best individuals who can provide a review of this technology. However, if you are going to be working with a contract agency, then that contract agency, the individuals who you are talking to on the phone, are going to be the individuals who are going to be making decisions about, do they want to adopt that technology, and do they want to work with you on this? And so therefore, it's important to think about which path are you going down. Is it going to be a grant agency or a contract agency? And then all of those commercialization decisions change based on what the agency is and how that technology would get commercialized.
Okay, this is great. There is a question that came in, but I'm going to hold off on it just for a little bit because we've already expanded the scope to some areas that I want to get into, and that is how SBIR fits into the broader scheme of finance. I think Glenn touched upon that question already when he mentioned angels. But before we open it up, just so we have a sense of the timing, Marcy, can you roughly, I think you may have said this already, but just to remind us, what roughly is the time period for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3? What's the upper bound and lower bound for each of those phases? And then with that in mind, we can then think about the other financing options that entrepreneurs have.
Okay, so just to give you a sense, first of all, there are 11 federal agencies, and each agency can be different. So, for example, if you apply for a phase 1 SBIR with the National Institutes of Health, a phase 1 SBIR is up to 6 months for phase 1 feasibility testing. However, occasionally the company may not be able to get to the point of, yes, we've completely proven the feasibility, and so therefore there may be a sort of a second phase 1 that the company applies for. So it could be 2 6-month periods, which means a year. If it's an STTR, that is, the phase 1 is a 1-year period. And so right there up front is 1 year. Phase 2 is up to 2 years. And then phase 3, it really depends on how long it will take you to commercialize the technology. And so, however, some technologies, such as through the National Institutes of Health, also require a second phase 2. So we're talking about 1 year plus 2 years plus 2 years. So we're already out at the end of the second phase 2, or they call it phase 2 stacking. We're already out 5 years from the day that you submit your proposal. And so we're really looking at, when I was talking about the TRL levels, then you really do need to think about what will that technology look like in the world 5 years from now, or who will be working on this? Who are our competitors? Who might be our customers? Maybe some of our competitors will become our customers. And so we need to look at all of those components. So the timing really depends on the agency. In some agencies, National Institutes of Health says, if you didn't prove your feasibility, then you are able to go for one more phase 1. You can resubmit your proposal. And when you're resubmitting that proposal, the reviewers look at what were the things that the reviewers commented on the first time. Did you, in fact, address those things in your phase 2 proposal? They may not care about the same things, so they'll say, did you address it? Were you responsive? And then they set that aside and they say, okay, now let's review this as a phase 1 from our perspective and what we're looking for. And so because of that, again, the timing can change. And some of the agencies, so NIH only allows you to apply for one more phase 1. And after that, you have to go someplace else if you want to stay with that technology. Other agencies.
So Marcy, let me just Yeah. So, Marcia, that was very helpful. And as I mentioned, I'd like you and Glenn to in our discussion to move on to the broader area of financing, because of course, within that frame of 5 to 7 years, however it may be, a company needs to survive. So we can talk a little bit about the broader scheme, but I think it might be worth bringing in the questions that have been posted here because I think they're related. And so the one of the questions picked up on your point, Marcy, that there's an SBIR office in Lockheed Martin, and the question then was asking what other SBIR in-house offices are there for other companies. I don't know if the questioner was asking about just Syracuse or upstate New York, but we can start with our focus there in terms of thinking about these other offices. And then more related to the question about financing more broadly, there is another interesting question. Where is the best place to find potential strategic partners for different technologies? And is there a web page listing them? And I think Molly has posted a link where we have some tutorials on finding partners. And I can share that with the audience members afterwards, but it'd be good to get your perspective. So that's I don't know how many parts there are to that question, but we are sort of moving into the broader sphere of how SBIR fits into financing goals and partnership goals. And so the smaller sub-questions are the SBIR in-house offices, and then if there are places to make these strategic alignments.
Okay, so first of all, there is one federal site you can go to that is www.sbir.gov, and Molly has posted that for you. And all 11 federal agencies can be found on that site. There are a number of things that just to be aware of on the site. Each of the agencies runs its own program and has its own rules and requirements, the way it operates. And so it would be very important if you are going to apply for an SBIR through Department of Energy versus National Institutes of Health, it's very important that you go out and study that federal agency. Also, before you start, and the first thing that you should do is the federal the registrations that are required. And that website will help you to identify where the registration information is, because you are required to register as a small business, so you need your employee identification number. You also need to register for SAM, which is the government contracting that is required. You also have the agency registrations. National Institutes of Health has 5 different registrations, plus each agency has its own website where the company posts its phase 1 and phase 2, where all the grants go in. It's a grant site. And for the National Institutes of Health, there are 2 components to that. And so you have to first study how does the company register and what are all of those issues having to do with registration. Now, it's important to, as soon as you realize that you are going to be going for an SBIR grant, you go out and you start that registration process, because sometimes it takes 4 to 6 weeks to do that, to get approved for the SBIR. So if I can then go on to, technology transfer offices in major corporations, is where you would go to have conversations with them. Now, they need to know that your technology is going to be of interest to them. So I would recommend that every year at the Tech Connect conference about the 3rd week in May, there is a national SBIR workshop. And I highly recommend that you go there and you will meet all of the people from all of the federal agencies that you could apply to. You will also meet government contractors such as Lockheed Martin. And when I mentioned that Lockheed Martin has an SBIR office, basically it's an SBIR outreach to SBIR companies. They have no federal agents who are there. They do not have any say. They are there to get into partnership arrangements with the companies. And so that's why they are trying to attract companies to go in and become their partner early on. And so thinking about how do you start building value, Well, if Lockheed Martin is attached to your phase one, you're probably going to have more credibility when you submit your phase one. And so, however, if it's pre-feasibility, you may not have Lockheed Martin willing to go in and sign on with you at that early stage. And so you can have a university be your partner for SBIR. You just can't have that person being the principal investigator. You can have major corporations. You can have other small corporations. You can even have foreign owned if it's less than 51%. And so therefore, you can have a partner in any type of organization. So I guess that probably covered everything that I wanted to cover in that segment.
Okay, well, turning to you, Glenn, first of all, did you have anything to add? And then secondly, could you get us a broader perspective? You mentioned angel investors before about how SBIR funding fits into the broader landscape. And in the context of giving us that picture, maybe think about what advice you would give from a corporate perspective on making these types of partnerships and arrangements.
Right. I think I'll start with that last point, and it'll just be an extension of something that Marcy said, and that's that it doesn't matter where you are in your submission process, even if you're contemplating an SBIR grant, talk to as many people as you can that have a knowledge of that marketplace as you can. And large corporates are especially knowledgeable. A large corporate could be selling hundreds of millions of dollars into a market that's very adjacent to the one that you're considering. They are likely to have deep channel knowledge. They're likely to have a significant amount of manufacturing expertise, and they may be quite willing to share that with you with the idea that you would become a supplier or partner to them. There are very few acquisitions that happen from the corporate side without some kind of prior relationship building. It'll either happen as informal discussions at first to talk about, well, you're making this product, but if you do it just a little bit this way, or if you add this quality feature to it, then we'll really be able to start thinking about, working with you. And when a startup is receptive to that, then it starts to build a working relationship with that corporate and the confidence in to take the relationship stepwise onto something that can be a lot more significant. So I think it is very important when you're just thinking about, even conceptually, that pre-TRL, early TRL1, TRL, you just have a concept. I think that's actually a pretty good time to be talking to people and talking to as many people in the related space as you can to get a sense of it. And it will surprise you. I'll tell you two stories. One story was we ran an event in our organization where we had many university technology transfer offices contributing their startups. We had them evaluated by corporates. And the uniform message I got back was from the university startup officers, the people that dealt with startups and universities, was we were surprised at which startups the corporates were interested in. And that is a very typical response in our network. So a large multinational corporation has very deep needs, very well-defined needs. They know what their needs are. We don't tend to know what they are, so the more people you talk to, the better off you're going to be. I would say that on the funding side, too, just because you have an SBIR grant does not ensure that you have something that's commercializable. And I'm going to say that again. If you have an SBIR grant, does not mean you have something that's commercializable. I've looked through many, many companies that had phase 2 SBIR grants, millions of dollars, that were not commercializable in the space that we were looking at it in our company, a large multinational. So to succeed in your company, you really need to align with the market needs. And how do you find that out? You find it out by talking to as many potential customers as you can, whether they're end user customers or whether they're the corporates that are going to partner with you, or whether they're going to be corporates that are going to be your customers in supply agreements, or however you want to do it. Okay? So very, very important at an early stage to develop those relationships. Now, let's say that you've done that and you had a really good strategy and you got through a nice proof of concept and you're at, say, a TRL 4 or 5 in your technology. You've got a nice proof of concept, but you've exhausted all your SBIR money, and this would be particularly true in a medical device or pharmaceutical venue where you've got a long runway to get into product. What are you going to do? And really, the funding venue that's going to be available to you is either venture capital or angels. And the way that it's working in the United States right now is it's really angel networks that you're going to want to look at. And most angel networks invest regionally, so that would be in your area. You would look for those. There are some national angel networks that you can get in touch with. But angels are wealthy individuals that invest in small companies cooperatively, basically. That's how they do it. And the way that you engage with angels is you will pitch a group of angels with a business plan and a pitch in a defined way, and you can get help usually within your university infrastructure to help you develop a good pitch for those angels, and often a representative within an organization like ours at nthe or within an angel group can help guide you in terms of what they're looking for as a pitch and what that particular organization is sourcing at that time. So the people that I talk to right now, hot areas are cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, corrosion is a big deal. Anything that purifies or manage water resources is a big deal. Clean tech is important right now. There's a lot of government money around for clean tech, so anything that helps buildings run at higher efficiency, efficient cooling systems, green materials, if they don't cost more, are very interesting. We have in our network a lot of food companies that are very interesting, and they're very interested in entrepreneurs now for novel types of what they call food experiences for people that can generate really nice meals at home in novel ways, not just warming something up in a microwave, but really innovating in that area. That's been a hot area that I've seen as well. So talk to lots of people, find out what the opportunities are, build that into your strategy at an early stage, and then keep talking to them as you move through the SBIR process so that when you get to the end of that money, that you have something that's going to be marketable to those angel networks. I'll finish with one other story, and this was a disappointment for me. I remember finding a really, really interesting cancer diagnostic technology. It was extremely promising, and about $20 million had been spent on doing the proof of concept. And we really, really wanted to invest in that technology, but the controls in the multi-site clinical study were not adequate to really ensure that that technology worked in a way that we had confidence to invest in it. You know, it would have taken an hour conversation to fix it. So if you're in that venue, if you are creating a product, it's very, very useful to get the specifications for what the corporate really needs to see, what the regulatory agencies need to see, what quality needs to be done, what sort of hurdles you're going to have to make ahead of time so that you can hit them and not sort of get to the point where you had something really interesting, but if you'd just done it a little bit differently, added one control, that you can get there. Those conversations are very important.
Well, thank you, Glenn. That was very helpful. And Molly has put up a link too. We'll collect all these links and pass it on after the webinar. But her link is to Tech Connect World, which is a conference later on this year. And Glenn, I understand that NSET too organizes various sorts of open houses. I forget exactly the term that you use internally, but and for marketing. But do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure, happy to do that. So at nset2.org is our website, and we run an event that we call University Startups Demo Day. So you can fill out a web form in about 2 hours, and you can have your startup visible to approximately 30 large corporates. I think the last time I added up their revenues, it was over $950 billion of revenues represented by those corporates. You identify the vertical that you're in. We show you to them. They're free to make contact with you at any time. They tell us what they think of the startups, and from that we select 40 of them to pitch at our event and to multiple investors and corporates. You can look on the website, but the feedback that we're getting from both the startups and the corporates is exceptional. I think it's the best venue going. I think it's better than any of the others because the technologies that I have seen pitched have been at a stage which were much more mature and much more developed in terms of their business and technology plans. the corporates are telling us that they really like what they're seeing, and we're getting much accelerated business interest from our investor networks. And I think at our next conference, it's quite possible that we'll have a large angel network meeting alongside of us to access some of these startups. We're also providing venues for them to pitch to VCs and angels, and we've engaged a Chinese venture capital group, which is ready to commit about $100 million a year to commercialize university startups. We've had quite a few others approaching us too. So we're very much about connecting startups up to gap funding, and you can find out more about that at nthe2.org. And we want to keep the universities involved alongside of that because we appreciate all the fine work the universities do to support the startups.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll get to you in a minute, Marcy. You don't have to raise your hand. We're not in a classroom, but I know it. We've got microphone issues. But thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Marcy. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes left, so it's a little bit of time management, and then I'll get to your question, Marcy. And I just have two final questions. One probably would be a subject of a webinar in and of itself, and that is sort of business decisions. What type of organizational issues would you advise clients in terms of how they set up their business? Whether from the university perspective, Marcy already mentioned the 51% rule or the 50% rule, but in terms of setting up a board, in terms of using a corporate form or an LLC, that's something we could spend another hour on, but it'd be good to just get some pointers here. And then the last question really is about 2 or 3 do's and don'ts that we'd leave to our audience. So let's hear from each of you about the first question, and then we'll go to the second question. So Marcy, did you have a question first?
Actually, I had a couple of things that I wanted to add to it. One of the conversations had to do with venture capital owned companies. And in the 2013 reauthorization, Congress said it was okay for federal agencies to take on venture capital as venture capital owned companies. But the venture capital companies themselves have to be small businesses. However, the only agency that has decided that they want to do that is the National Institutes of Health, and primarily because of FDA approval, and that's a very expensive proposition. And so NIH right now, Department of Defense is not interested, and other agencies are not interested in doing that. The other thing is, when you are looking for your topic, there are some topics that all 11 federal agencies address, even though they address them from different perspectives. So just because you may have a health product, you might want to also think about, does that have opportunities for agriculture? Or the military has a lot of people who are out in the field who are dealing with health issues as well. And so Department of Defense may be a very good applicant or a very good agency for that. So look across the federal agencies, and the SBIR.gov website will enable you to do that. You can put in keywords and you can find that kind of information. Tech Connect, you mentioned something about later on in the year. It's already that conference has already taken place. It's in May. So I would highly recommend to get onto that list and go next May when if you're interested in this. Now to get into business decisions. So do you want to go? Do you want to have a C corporation, and you want to have an LLC or whatever? So think about if you are going to need to have, or if you are going to have to take on venture capital and have investors, you might think about setting it up as a C corporation, or you could also elect to, you can change that the election slightly, but I would recommend against an LLC if you're going to have take on investors pretty readily. Most often, companies that have LLCs have to reorganize in order to make it easier to take on, to bring investors in. Other business decisions, I think you're starting with a research and development project or research and development concept. And I think it's a requirement that you think about that as a business. And I think, Glenn talked about this a little bit also, but it really needs to be a serious business. And once you step off into that SBIR, you're not just you may be based at a university, but it really needs to be the business model that you're looking at, and it needs to be that growth. And so thinking about, it's very important who the principal investigator is, who the partners are, and all of those kinds of things to help the company, move itself toward the commercial market, moving it out of the university. I think that's probably basically do's and don'ts. I think one of the do's and don'ts, they talk about the Department of Justice, and that was a big deal before. And if you put your budget together, that's how you should be spending your budget. Absolutely, that's true, because there are people who are wearing orange jumpsuits now that haven't. However, that really has not happened as much as a number of people have said that it might happen. And so, therefore, the Department of Justice is there to keep everybody honest. But it's the kind of thing that you've got to be. It has to be, basically, you're working with federal agencies, and so it's not a good thing to go in and try to cheat the system. Also, I wanted to mention that the Federal Laboratory Consortium is a network of federal laboratories, and they are often very good partners. They also have technology. You can license patents from them, and you can go onto their website, flc.gov. flc.com. And so that's another potential partnership. And if there is not equipment out in the commercial market that you need, you can go to the Federal Laboratory Consortium laboratory, and they will let you use the equipment without charging you for it. So there may be some things that you have to agree with them to do and not do, and that sort of thing, licensing kinds of things. But I would recommend that would be something that you have on your list of organizations to talk to.
Okay, let me take a crack at those questions. In terms of business process, strong recommendation is get yourself a good management team and get yourself a good set of advisors. And what I mean when I say good is people that are going to be credible from the corporate side, not just researchers or academic investors, but people who have a track record of running businesses and succeeding with businesses. People that are in a market space that's adjacent to you, that have commercialized products. That will go a lot to bring credibility to your company. It will go a lot to helping you succeed with funding, whether it's public or private money. So strong recommendation there. My do and my don't are two sides of a coin. My do is ask your customers how your technology meets needs, how it satisfies their market, and what they want to do with it. And don't go to a large corporate and try and tell them how to market a product that you have. That is the biggest turnoff you can imagine. So I'll stop there.
Thank you both, Glenn and Marcy, for those. We have a few minutes left. We try to end at the top of the hour, but there's lots of information here, and I want to see if there are any other questions. We did get a comment from somebody at the University of Utah mentioning how they're involved in SBIR and STTR funding and are always looking for potential strategic partners. So I'll definitely follow up on that if anybody wants to contact me directly. My email address, which I did post, but I'll give it to you again, is S as in Sam, GHOSH01@syr.edu. So feel free to contact me, and Molly and I will work on putting together the various links that were talked about during the conversation, and try to make that available. Glenn has also passed on his email address. I assume that's also something I can pass on, glenn@nset2.org. And so why don't we start wrapping this up a little bit? I don't know if there are any other questions, because there's so much to talk about at this point. I will turn this back to Marcy and Glenn briefly for some final words and thoughts. But do look out for other webinars. We do plan to have others in this vein, certainly at the end of the summer and then towards the next academic year. And if you have any suggestions for particular topics, feel free to contact me Again, my email is sghosh01@syr.edu, and we can plan around those. And so thank you, Marcy, for the information about about the Tech Connect conference, and we can send you more information about that. We're in the process of organizing a conference or part of a conference on November 17th that's associated with Next, and we're planning some panels regarding entrepreneurship and financing, and we'll be glad to give you some more information about that for those who are interested. But the hour flies by quickly, and as you can see, we could talk forever, and I do just want to spend just a few minutes thanking again Marcy and Glenn, and also thanking Molly and Joel Whitney for providing the background support and the questions and the information on this, especially for Joel for getting all the microphones and technology working. But as we wrap up now, I don't see any other questions coming in. Glenn and then Marcy, any final thoughts and comments that you'd like to leave our audience with on a positive note, or even a negative note, or two negative notes, if that's possible?
Reach me.
I'd like
I
to
am
leave on a
at
positive note. Thank you so much.
neb@syr.edu.
Yeah. Did everybody catch that? I didn't. I think I was talking over you.
All right, it's MSSONNEB, B as in boy, at syr.edu. Or you can also contact Molly.
Okay, so I would just say thank you to everybody for organizing. It's been a pleasure to be with you. NCET2 talks to probably 60, 70 large corporates. As I mentioned, we talk to 150 plus universities across the country, and we interact with over 200 startups twice a year at each of our demo days. If we can be of assistance to you, if you want to do a call or explore more with us, then get in touch through the email, and we're happy to explore with you. So thank you for your time today.
I think that just when you are applying for SBIR, get to know your agency, give them a phone call. One other thing just to be aware of is the contract agencies typically will have they will have a solicitation period that opens before the official date. It means that all of the topics are not yet confirmed. However, during that closed period, you can ask them questions, like all of the contract agencies. You can ask them questions about their solicitation without having anyone else have to get that information. Once the topic opens officially, then all of the questions that you ask and all of the answers get posted onto the website for the agency, so everyone can have access to that. So if you have a particularly astute question, you want to make sure for the contract agencies that you catch in on that, 4 weeks before the solicitation is official. So read obsessively the SBIR rules, and if you applied 6 months ago or a year ago, read them all over again, because things do change from solicitation to solicitation.
Thank you, Marcy. And so that brings to end this, I think, very highly informative session, and we look forward to organizing more like these in the future. And so on behalf of the New York Science and Technology Law Center and the Technology Commercialization Law Program at Syracuse University College of Law, I want to thank you for your attendance and for your great questions and discussions. So have a very good day.